بینندگان عزیز برنامه پل سلام. به برنامه پل خوش آمدید.
Good evening and welcome to Pull. 8 years after the fall of the Taliban, Afghan women are still fighting for justice and independence. Tonight, we'll talk with prominent women advocates and a member of the Muslim clergy about the legal and religious rights of women in Afghanistan and who they can turn to for help if they are facing abuse.
کمک کننده خانم‌ها در صورت تجاوز به خانهان. در قسمت بعدی این برنامه صحبت به یک تن از خانم‌های که زندگی خود را صرف کمک به قربانی سوختگی در افغانستان و در جهان.
Corey Oser is the Deputy Director of Women for Women International, a non-profit organization which helps improve the rights, freedoms, and status of women around the world in conflict and post-conflict environments.
در ساختن حقوق، آزادی و حیثیت زنان در مناطق جنگ زده و مناطق بعد از جنگ در جهان.
As the Imam of the Mustafa Center, Qari Zia provides religious counseling to the Afghan-American community of Northern Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. And Irfana Anwar is an immigration lawyer who is the former co-director of the Family Law Division of Karamah, Muslim Women Lawyers for Human Rights. Welcome to you all.
به برنامه پل خوش آمدید. Imam Zia, some of the international organizations who are in Afghanistan have been criticized for being insensitive to local customs, where marital problems are usually solved by the family or tribal elders and not by the courts. But do these type of community mediations usually result in a fair outcome for the woman?
Mostly, I think they don't. And that's the problem that needs to be addressed. And it's a problem that cannot be resolved, as far as I understand it, through courts even and through government enforcement even. It's an issue that I think that as a society, the Afghan society as a whole, they have to all realize that this is an issue as far as women's rights are concerned, that they need to address, and that there are certain cultural aspects of our Afghan culture that we need to do away with, and that we need to look at it from purely Islamic perspective, which came to give Muslim women their rights, which came to restore freedom and justice. And so the outcome of mediations of the family members and different tribal contexts, usually it does not work because it is based on those old customs that are mostly against women, where women don't get any representation, they don't get a say in the affairs. So basically it's an issue that arises and it's decided by men, and it's mostly in favor of men.
And why do you think that religious leaders like yourself are sometimes the ones who are violating Islamic law when it comes to women's rights and not promoting Islam?
I think it has been a problem in Afghanistan that a lot of the culture that has dated back to centuries has been mixed up with religion, and the culture, unfortunately, and parts of the Muslim world does not necessarily go with the religion. So the religious teachings are actually changed and misinterpreted in light of the culture that favors men.
But going to women in Afghanistan, Corey, your organization, Women for Women International, provides resources to women in post-conflict countries to help rebuild their lives. And part of that is providing awareness of legal rights. Can you tell us a little bit more about those programs?
Sure, exactly. We really look at the empowerment of women and helping women to rebuild their lives in a holistic perspective, meaning that we look at women's economic situation and help to build women's skills economically. And then we have a program that we call Rights Awareness and Life Skills Education, which, as you mentioned, is helping women to become aware of what their rights mean, what it means to have rights, and what those rights are within their local context. We know that in many countries there may be a constitution that guarantees on paper equality between men and women, but in reality, at the village level, what's practiced is quite different than what might be in the national laws. So it's really helping women to see those differences and where they can negotiate, and giving women some of the basic tools for their immediate survival, and then for understanding their place as women, and then for being active.
Yeah, and those rights in the Constitution are obviously compatible with Islamic law. But Imam Zia, what does Islam say about domestic abuse and also about divorce in cases concerning domestic abuse?
If we were to understand this in reality, we will have to go to the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And about him, one hadith says that in his whole lifetime, he never raised his hand on anyone, his servants or his wives or anybody else in his entire lifetime. And that's our understanding. That's how we interpret Islam, and that's from whom we should take our Islam and our Islamic guidance.
So there is guidance in Islam against domestic abuse, as well as in the laws of the country. It's a matter of implementing it and educating the population to better understand and follow those rules.
Back with more advice on where to turn for help after the break. Continuing our conversation with Corey Oser, Imam Zia, and Irfana Anwar.
Irfana, I want to address the issue where some societies view women as the property of men. What does the Quran have to say about this notion?
I don't think, Quran or Islam or the hadiths of the Prophet, peace be upon him, ever have mentioned women as a property of man, that human beings are seen as equal in the eyes of God, and what differentiates you is your deeds, and that every human being is answerable to God. So God is the ultimate owner of mankind, and everything that contains the world. So if anyone tries to take ownership of another human being, it's actually a form of what we call shirk. It's actually, which is a great sin. So for anyone who claims that women belong to men as a form of property, that actually goes against a very central concept in Islamic law. And I think that I work very closely with a lot of imams and religious leaders, and they don't have that understanding of Islam. And this issue of abuse and men and women, gender issues, this exists in all countries, in all societies, in all religions. I don't think that Afghan men or Muslim men are any more violent than any other man. It's just that religion and traditions are used that way. The whole cycle of power and control exists in all cultures and societies. So I think that concept probably exists in other cultures, not in just Islamic culture.
And Corey, with your organization's programs in Afghanistan, has this issue come up from the women who have come to your organization for legal assistance?
Absolutely. Women for Women doesn't provide legal assistance itself. It will refer women to other existing resources if they have specific legal needs. Their objective is really to inform women, to get women thinking about some of these issues, to get women to understand that they're not alone, both in their own community and also that they're not alone in terms of what women face in Afghanistan compared to what women face around the world. And I completely agree with what you said, that these are really global issues that affect people from all religions and all cultures and economic levels. And that's really one of the objectives of building awareness, is making women understand that this is something that's faced by women in so many places, and that they're not the only ones to be able to have to struggle with these issues.
And Imam Zia, in the cases of domestic abuse, does a woman under Islamic law have the right to a divorce in such circumstances?
Most certainly. That's actually one of the bases that is mentioned in the books of Islamic jurisprudence, that a woman can use that as a basis for seeking divorce. And for domestic abuse, one of the scholars of the Hanafi fiqh, Ibn Abidin, he says that the judge should actually penalize a husband who has committed domestic violence against his wife.
And is the woman allowed to then remarry?
Yes, most definitely. Even though our culture may not look as favorably upon that, but we know that in Islamic law, a divorce is something that's permissible under the circumstances, especially violence from husband, and then remarriage is something totally accommodated and permissible under the Islamic law.
But in a lot of these cases, women are not coming forward when they are dealing with these problems. And Irfana, you have worked with women who have been victims of domestic violence here in the United States. Why do you think that women are not coming forward when they are victims of such abuse?
There's so many different layers to that, answering that question. I think part of it is internal issues, that there's a lot of the concepts of shame and family honor and patience are abused. Women are told that to be patient is a virtue, which it is, but not in not these circumstances. And there's a lot of shame attached to leaving your home. There's a lot of shame attached to going to a shelter. So there are a lot of issues that women face internally from within themselves, within their culture, which holds them back. But also, American culture and society is also not a very easy place for women to speak out. The legal system is very difficult to navigate. Law enforcement is very difficult to handle as well. Calling a police who comes to your home if your husband hits you is a very traumatic incident in and of itself. So there's many Muslim women, when they come to the U.S., they live in suburbs where there isn't a lot of access. So they have suburban isolation. They don't have a family unit. And in the culture and back home, they have big families where they can speak to people. Over here, they feel a lot more isolated. So I think there's pressures from the outside. There are obstacles outside of the home which are difficult, and there are obstacles within the home as well.
So this sounds very similar to what women in Afghanistan could be going through. And here there are shelters, there's places that a woman could go if she's suffering from such abuse. And Corey, I know Women for Women has certain programs. There are organizations who are providing shelters.
Right.
But where could Afghan women go for help in these situations?
As you mentioned, there are shelters, or at least 10 shelters in different areas of the country. Typically, the services tended to focus more in Kabul, but I believe that they've been expanding to some of the other provinces. And I think this is one of the major challenges, is where do women go for help? Because from my understanding, the shelters can't accommodate even all of the women that need the assistance. So I think one of the important things that we try to emphasize in the program is women building support among women in their communities, because it's something that is extremely difficult to face when you're alone, when you feel that you have nowhere to go, when you have the sense of shame and you wonder, whether you're going to be cast out of your family. So I think it's slowly trying to build support within your communities and find out where you live, where the closest shelter or organization might be that deals with domestic violence or with women's legal issues.
And a lot of problems in Afghanistan, as well as other countries, is when there a broad difference in age between the woman and the man. And the legal age of marriage by law has been raised to 16 for women and 18 for men in Afghanistan. However, this issue of women who are being married at a very young age still continues. Imam Zia, I wanted to ask you, why is this practice still common? If it's even against Islamic law, why does it continue?
Well, it goes back to the general level of ignorance of Islamic laws that is prevalent in Afghanistan in particular, and the attachment that people have to the patriarchal tribal traditions. So it's part of that larger problem that we have of not applying Islamic laws and not having a correct understanding of Islamic laws. And so mostly those Islamic laws are mixed up with a lot of culture.
So there's a definite need for better leadership in the religious community to assist with this issue.
Certainly.
And Corey, you were talking about resources. How would you compare the sensitivities of people in America to this issue of domestic violence versus what you have seen as part of your organization's work in Afghanistan?
I think it is still very much rooted in being a secret issue, an issue that is something that people feel ashamed to talk about in the public sphere. And I think that there are changes that need to be made both at the political level in terms of transforming institutions, at the social level in terms of the religious leaders, education, just the general attitudes of men and women, and then at the individual level in terms of even how people raise their children and how they choose solutions that are not based on violence, but are based on more cooperation and communications.
Irfana, I wanted to ask you, as a Muslim, you're an attorney, you've worked with women who have been abused in a domestic situation. If you were speaking to women in Afghanistan, maybe someone sitting there and they're going through this abuse at home, what kind of advice would you give to them?
I would tell them to take the courage to tell someone, just to start the process by talking about it and to not be afraid. That, God helps those who help themselves. and that and God has promised that you help yourself and you have the right to better your life. You have the right to live your life in dignity. And I think all women, including myself, respond best when we're faced with arguments from within our culture and within our tradition, and that we don't have to go very far to look for justifications to leave. That just looking at our Prophet, peace be upon him, his life, the life of his wives who were very empowered, and the lives of so many women who live in Muslim countries who are successful, who live empowered lives, and most women do, a lot of women do. And they have every right to do that. And just to start the process by finding somebody who is sympathetic to them and they can use their intuition. They will know when they meet the right person. But to speak to as many people as possible and to just start taking steps to leaving and looking for resources, because once they start looking for the resources, God will help them find a way.
And lastly, Imam Zia, as an imam, as an Afghan man, for your fellow brothers sitting at home watching this in Afghanistan, what advice would you give them about this issue? Not maybe how it affects themselves, but also if they see it being done in their household or other households.
My message to all my brothers in Afghanistan is for them to look at the teachings of Islam. Whenever they're faced in a situation or they themselves have a tendency to be violent in their homes, to just look at the teachings of the Quran and look at how it was explained in the life of the Prophet, peace be upon him. The Prophet, peace be upon him, is the most beloved person to all Muslims and to all Afghans, of course. And when there is something said about the Prophet, peace be upon him, the whole world erupts. And so that person that's so beloved to us, he never ever in his entire lifetime raised his hand on anybody. That includes women and children. And so do we want to follow him? Do we want to be his ummah? He never was violent in his entire lifetime. And he is our best role model, and he's the one who we should follow. And that's the way we should understand our religion.
This discussion has been very helpful. Afghanistan has gone through a long period of conflict, which results in more violence, unfortunately. But following the example of the Prophet, peace be upon him, the laws of the country, and just human dignity, I think hopefully Afghan women can suffer less, and the men can also be aware that this is not the right thing to do. So thank you very much for your time. ما صحبت‌های خواهیم داشت با Rebecca Grossman.
After the break, we'll be speaking to Rebecca Grossman of the Grossman Burn Foundation, the first modern foundation for burn victims in Afghanistan.
حملات‌های رایگان برای قربانی‌های سوختگی در افغانستان اجرا می‌نمایند.
Back with Rebecca Grossman, who's going to tell us the story of the young Afghan girl she brought to the U.S. for a life-saving operation, giving her a new lease on life.
Rebecca, you and your husband founded the first modern burn center in Kabul. What led you both to do that?
Well, originally, my husband runs a California-based burn center, the Grossman Burn Centers, and several years ago, we had a case of a young girl, an Afghan girl, that came to us who was horrifically burned. Zubaydah came to California for treatment, and we ended up being her legal guardian. So in a way, she's become a daughter to us. And Zubaydah went through 13 surgeries over a 1-year period. And during this time, we became quite immersed in the Afghan community there in the Los Angeles area. And as we started to learn, when we traveled back and forth to Afghanistan, that there is no opportunity for quality health care, much less burn care in this area of the world. And so with the help of a Dr. Abdul Asad, who we had met during this journey, we partnered up with Direct Relief International and our foundation, which is the Grossman Burn Foundation, and we raised money and we opened the first highly specialized reconstructive surgery and burn center in that region of the world, and it's in Kabul.
And you mentioned the young Afghan girl, her name is Zubaydah.
Zubaydah.
What did you learn from Zubaydah from the time that she was with you and after she left?
Everybody everybody got involved and helped bring Zubaydah to America. And her personality was quite interesting. She's a born leader, and she learned English in 12 weeks after we put her in school when she first moved in with us. And she was very outgoing, very smart, loved to dance. And it's been a real journey with Zubaydah. We've had her in our life on and off for the last 7 years. She travels back and forth to Afghanistan. Right now she is contracted as an interpreter for the Army there, and she travels out into the field on medical missions and translates for women patients.
Zubaydah was very badly burned.
Yes,
and how did she endure those injuries?
It turns out that Zubaydah's parents at the time had really concocted the story that it was an accident, because they knew that she wouldn't get the help that she needed had the real story been told.
And what was the real story?
Zubaydah set herself on fire. And she was a victim of her environment and circumstances, living in an area where it's hopeless, and there's despair, and there's unhappiness, and there is a type of madness that exists in the culture there because of that.
What was it about her life that caused her to be in such despair?
Well, she was living out in Farah in the deserts. She has a large family. There's 9 children altogether, and very poor, no electricity, no plumbing, and she's very smart, and just had no opportunity whatsoever to do anything. They had no schools. So in some ways it's a blessing, because Zubaydah since then has been able to go to school, and she's learned so much, and she's sending the message out there and telling other women, this is not what you want to do. No matter how bad your life is, no matter what it is your circumstances are, you do not want to set yourself on fire.
And the Grossman Burn Foundation that you and your husband have established in Kabul, can you tell us what the objective is and what kind of assistance that you provide for Afghans who have received burns?
Well, we're supporting, sponsoring, I should say, in partnership with Direct Relief International, the Afghan Reconstructive Surgery and Burn Center in Kabul.
And does your organization have a website that people can access?
The website for the Afghan Reconstructive Surgery and Burn Center is www.arsbc.com.
Well, Rebecca, I really want to thank you and your husband, Dr. Grossman, for saving Zubaydah's life and also setting up this burn center that will help to provide treatment for other women and men who suffer burns in Afghanistan.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thanks again to Corey Oser, Imam Zia, Irfana Anwar, and Rebecca Grossman for their work on behalf of Afghan women.
ما حتما دنبال پیشرفت خانم‌ها در افغانستان با شما خواهیم بود.
If you have any further questions, please visit us on the web at americaabroadmedia.org or tolo.tv. See you next week for another edition of Pull.
خداحافظ شما دوستان عزیز.